Okay. So, طيب. So بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله، وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها، وكل محدثة بدعة، وكل بدعة ضلالة، وكل ضلالة في النار. I commence in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. I send salutations and prayers and peace upon the finality of prophets and messengers, Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, upon his family, his companions, and all who follow him in righteousness until the day of judgment. Indeed, the best speech is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran. And the best guidance is the guidance of Muhammad salawatullahi wassalamuhu alayhi. Beloved brothers and sisters, alhamdulillah, we are on our final story, inshallah ta'ala. And this is her version. Next week we do his version, inshallah ta'ala. And it's talking about, and it's titled Stress. Right, so this week we're looking at her stress and then his stress, inshallah ta'ala. And then the week after, on November 24th, alhamdulillah, I have just confirmed Sister Susie, Dr. Susie Ismail, who is the author of this, mashallah, amazing book, to join us on our final session, inshallah ta'ala, where she will come in and discuss with us the reason for putting forth this research, inshallah ta'ala. What made her want to research this topic, the importance and the relevance of researching this topic, and kind of where do we go from here as a Muslim community with the information that we've been given and the research that has been, mashallah, brought forth, inshallah ta'ala. So we really look forward to having her on with us in 2 weeks, inshallah ta'ala. That'll be Wednesday, November 24th, inshallah ta'ala, for the final session for this third marriage course, inshallah ta'ala. And may Allah bless her for, alhamdulillah, accepting our invitation, inshallah ta'ala. So khair. So like always, we're going to commence by reading the case study. And then after reading the case study, we'll do some analysis of the case study, inshallah ta'ala. So her story. It says, I've wasted 7 years of my life and I will never get that time back. Before marriage, I often heard people say that the first year of marriage was the hardest. And that if you could survive that initiation time, everything else would fall into place. I kept repeating that phrase, hoping that it would become a reality, but it never did. No one ever told me that marriage was just another euphemism for indentured servant. I hadn't risen to the top of my engineering class and excelled in my master's program just so that I could stand in the kitchen cooking, cleaning, and meeting all of his needs. I didn't sign up for that part of marriage. I guess our first year wasn't so bad. He annoyed me with his passivity around his parents and his disgusting habits of leaving his dishes unwashed in the sink and his dirty socks mixed in with my delicates in the hamper. But for the most part, things were pretty fun. Our marriage allowed us to join the exclusive club of young and hip married couples. And we spent the majority of our time at board game parties and in couples outings. We even took a few spur-of-the-moment weekend getaways with various friends. I made it clear at the start of our marriage that I was not going to be the overweight housewife who did nothing but menial chores all day long. I was an independent woman and planned on staying that way. Of course, Blinded by love at the start of our relationship, he convinced me that if he really wanted someone to cook and clean, he would just hire a housekeeper instead of marrying one. Oh, how quickly he forgot those fake words. I'd grown up accustomed to certain comforts that simplicity meant I didn't have to deny myself the little extras that might make me happy. As a working woman, I surely deserve to occasionally treat myself to a nice brand name bag or to a slightly overpriced pair of shoes. Apparently, my husband didn't think so. Even though he'd left the finances to me, the ingrate decided I wasn't doing a good enough of a job and changed all the passwords so that he could take over all of the things. I didn't really care at that point since the unpaid bills were getting way too tedious for me anyway. I'd lost all respect for him by this point because he obviously didn't have the skills to manage a household. Rather than embarrass my family, I kept plodding forward and sticking with my marriage. It's not like we didn't ever have a happy time or a few laughs over the past 7 years. But somehow, in retrospect, misery tends to overshadow the fleeting moments of comfort and joy. The longer we were married, the fewer and more far between the laughter and smiles seemed to take place. It's not like I didn't try to please him. He already knew that I wasn't the cooking and cleaning type, so I expected that somewhere along the line he would have offered to take over those duties himself or to hire someone else to do it. This is what our pre-marriage conversation had clarified. Wasn't it? No such offer came from him. In the meantime, I bought cute little outfits to wear around the house and made sure my hair was stylish and my makeup fully applied, even when I just wanted to come home and bum around in sweats. He never even noticed. It's not like I was spending money on myself to please other men. It was him I wanted to keep attached. He never sent a single compliment my way, and he never seemed to notice that when I was all dolled up and had gotten a facial or expensive new highlights just for him. I was starting to grow tired of our busy yet strictly routine lives. It annoyed me that he constantly made references to his mother's excellent cooking and her ability to raise her children in the best of ways. I wanted to shout at him that he might as well move back in with his mother if he thought so highly of her, but I held my tongue. Instead, I began to hold a grudge against his mom, and even though it was irrational, I had a very hard time carrying on a conversation with her or even being civil because I felt like I had to compete with her for her son's affection. What kind of life was that? A few months after we'd had several arguments and I was beginning to question my own sanity and habits, I found out I was pregnant. He was the most callous and uncaring father-to-be that I could have ever imagined. I was a few weeks into my pregnancy and I could barely sit straight from all the nausea and fatigue. All he could think about was the monetary blow that we'd experience if he stayed home. I was adamant that I was not going to work during my pregnancy. It hadn't been my idea, after all, to get pregnant before we were financially stable. We both had student loans we were struggling to pay off, and our credit card debts just kept accumulating. Rather than being the supportive husband I imagined he would be, it was like he didn't think pregnancy was that big of a deal. He couldn't understand why I lay in bed for most of the days, gagging and puking rather than enjoying life. I know that this is terrible to say, but part of me thinks that he might have been secretly relieved when I miscarried and lost the baby. He didn't seem in the least bit upset and shrugged the ordeal off as if I just needed to recover from a common cold. He wouldn't acknowledge or accept the fact that I was in mourning. Sure, I'd only been a few weeks along, but I felt something. I had a little something growing inside of me, and now that someone was gone. The emptiness in my womb felt like I had been completely drained of my personality as well. I grieved in my own way for the little being who was not meant to be born. It wasn't that I felt the true bonds of motherhood or some sort of yearning to have a litter of children. It was more a feeling of failure that I couldn't accept. I had failed at something even the most uneducated and backwards of women did successfully on a daily basis. My body had betrayed me with my incomplete gestation and left me wondering why. Of course, I was religious enough to accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan, but I couldn't help question my own role in the miscarriage. Was this punishment because I wasn't really sure that I was ready to be a parent? Was this some type of foreshadowing of future futile pregnancies? It was like planting a peach tree, even though you didn't like peaches that much, with the expectation it would eventually bear fruit, but then becoming sorely disappointed upon finding it barren. I suffered my self-incriminating questions in silence, since my husband had no sympathy for me. I withdrew from my friends and family because I could not face them with the idea of failure blatantly emanating from me. I was determined to have a child as soon as my body had recovered and set out full force to do what I could to make it happen. I read books upon books about the topic, bought charts to map my cycles, used high-tech gadgets to monitor my basal body temperature, and pushed for scheduled intimacy with only one goal in mind. Even though my initial post-graduation 5-year plan did not include a baby in the picture, I revised it accordingly to incorporate giving birth to a child within the next 12 months. Determined, I set out to complete the task in my detail-orientated way. I couldn't afford to be distracted by work or friends or anything else at that point, since I felt like a woman on a mission. A few months into my campaign was all it took to become pregnant again. I was relieved that I didn't have to wait too long to be successful this time around. Positive that I could see this pregnancy to the end, I even began to do a little light house cleaning and meal prep to alleviate the bit of boredom I had been feeling. I think the glow of impending motherhood actually did touch me this time around, and I settled into a very serene state. Unfortunately, that phase didn't last long, since I miscarried early again. SubhanAllah. Just as my first pregnancy, my husband showed me very little compassion. To his credit, he did seem a little shattered this time around, but his sadness was nothing compared to my serious depression. Conceiving and delivering a child became my obsession. It was as if someone had presented me a challenge that I knew I could meet if I just worked hard enough. I stayed up late every night making dua for the eventual birth of a child. I grudgingly returned back to work, but could not think of anything else but the baby that I had not yet conceived. I began to research far-stretched ideas like surrogate mothers, in vitro fertilization, and even the possibility of adoption. I had lost sight of why I might want a child and could only focus instead on my elusive success in carrying and delivering a baby to term. 3 long years after struggling to make it happen were finally over with the birth of my son. No matter how much I researched and how much I thought I was ready, labor hurt way more than anyone had ever told me. After the excruciating natural delivery that I had insisted on to prove that I can handle the pain, I held the child I tried so hard to conceive and carry. The baby that the nurses placed on my chest looked nothing like the rosy-cheeked cherub I had imagined. Instead of feeling the expected emotions of elation, I felt nothing upon carrying him. The wrinkled, bloody, hairy specimen contradicted all my dreams of the perfect baby, and instead looked like a smaller and much uglier version of my husband's grandfather. I felt nauseated as I held him, and I practically threw him at my husband, who kept oohing and eyeing about our baby's beauty. Were we even talking about the same child? As if labor and delivery were not bad enough, nothing could have prepared me for the pain of uterine contractions and engorgement that soon assaulted my already worn-out body. Fully expecting my husband to spend the night in the hospital with me, he insisted that he had to go home and get some rest because of a big meeting he had at work the next day. In his place, he sent his mother over to help me in his absence. Not only had he refused to participate in the Lamaze classes or to even help coach me through my labor, my husband seemed completely disinterested in the fact that I had succeeded in bringing the child into our marriage. Even after we returned from the hospital, he only had eyes for our son. Not even a figurative pat on the back was given to me as he rolled his eyes at my bodily complaints and insisted that it was apparently all in my head. He went back to work a few days after our son's birth, and I found myself utterly alone with the baby. His mother had offered to stay, but I had had enough of her lectures and criticisms and practically begged her to go home. I was still completely unfamiliar with this child and felt totally incompetent in trying to change his diaper, rock him to sleep, nurse him, or even give him a bottle. My body was exhausted, and the child seemed to constantly be hungry or upset. I felt fatigued in the worst way and could barely keep up with the diaper changes and nursing sessions. By the end of the first month, I needed to end my initially self-imposed solitary confinement. I loved my newborn son, but just could not see the point of constantly changing, rocking, feeding, and burping. My husband would come home from work filled with stories about his day, while all I had to report was how many times the baby had pooped. In a weird way, my husband found this fascinating and wanted to know every single detail. After the baby hits the 6-week mark, I realized that I had to get out of the house or I would go truly insane. I had already lost my girlish figure and felt that if I sat around craving chocolates and soap operas for one more day, I was sure to balloon into a huge elephant. I craved adult conversation and interaction, and I needed to be more than just a mommy again. So against the advice of my husband, parents, and friends, I decided to go back to work. It's not like I wasn't worried about the baby. I just thought I could be a better mom if I would just miss him a little bit. It wasn't like I wouldn't be thinking about him at work all day. My leaky chest wouldn't allow me to forget, while my husband was blissfully oblivious to the aches and pains that accompanied being a parent. My body gave me constant reminders. I didn't want to be a bad mom. I'd read all about the benefits of nursing, so I refused to give my son formula. Instead, I carried my pump around work with me and had to find a hideaway to express my son's next meal every chance I got. At night, my husband snored beside me as I blindly woke up and struggled to stay awake, nursing the baby all night in our rocking chair. All this effort was lost on my husband and my in-laws. They seemed to think that I was neglecting the baby by going back to work so soon. That wasn't it at all. I needed some me time, some time away from home where I could think and be successful and be recognized for success. With the baby, I felt out of control. I couldn't predict a good night from a bad one. I couldn't gauge when a poopy diaper was about to happen, and I felt like a failure at trying to implement some sort of sleep schedule. No one commended me when the baby looked clean or well fed. No one said good job when he burped out loud, obviously satisfied from my milk. Instead, they all expected me to be with him 24 hours a day. I figured the night shift was more than enough. I wanted my husband to spend more time with the baby so that he would know what it felt like. I wasn't about to ask for help though and admit that maybe I couldn't handle parenthood. I wasn't about to, instead, I began going out after work once in a while and staying slightly longer hours. I missed my son, but I also felt that it would be good for him to bond with others during that time. As the baby grew older, it was easier and easier for me to leave him and go out. I knew he was in good hands with his father or his grandparents, and I figured I was doing them a favor by allowing them to bond and to share quality time with my son. By the time his first birthday rolled around, I felt like I was finally greeting the hang of the whole mommyhood thing. I was even somewhat able to tolerate my husband again. Ever since I became pregnant with our son, he'd put more baby weight on than I had. Where once he could pass for merely big boned, as he liked to say, he was now easily at least 50 pounds overweight. His slovenly habits had also gone from bad to worse. He never cleaned up after himself, and his penchant for pasta just kept adding to his waistline. I tried to steer him in a healthier direction, but by buying only frozen lean meal dinners. But my efforts went unnoticed as he accused me of being lazy around the house. Just a few short months after my son's first birthday, I was shocked to find out I was expecting again. During my pregnancy with our second child, my husband accepted a promotion and began to travel for his job. Every other week he was going somewhere new. I envied him the ability to have the best of both worlds. I continued to work my long hours, but had to come home to a screaming baby, swollen feet, and angry stretch marks glaring up at me all over my swollen body. He had no clue how difficult it was to juggle it all. I wasn't one to complain though. I tried to be a perfect parent, but I often felt like a single mom. When he came home from his trips, his son ran to him as if he were the best father in the world. I hated that betrayal and put my foot down about him not traveling anymore. He said the only way he could stay put was as if he accepted a lower paying position. I didn't care. I just needed him to be home to help me. By that time, our relationship had disintegrated to the point where I couldn't even tell him that I needed him or that I missed his company. Instead, I just accused him of being horribly selfish, a selfish father and a husband. He took the pay cut and feeling guilty, I decided to work extra hours so that I could make up for lost income. By the time my daughter was born, I had worked my way up the ranks of my company and felt confident of my position at work. At home, it was another story. I felt like an utter failure with my kids and husbands. I thought I was caring for one baby. I thought caring for one baby was tough, but with two of them, I felt like I was at the point of collapse. I kept up a happy facade in front of everyone, but it was killing me that I just didn't seem to be cut out for the position of mother and wife. I saw my friends juggling 3 or 4 children and living happily, and I felt like a total defect. I envied them, their husbands, their parents, their homes, and even their children. I rationalized that they had better husbands who helped them at home, or quieter children who didn't cry that often, or that they didn't have demanding careers to juggle with their parenting duties, or that their parents took care of the cooking, cleaning, and child rearing for them. My list went on as I grew more and more jealous of everyone around me. I've read enough about postpartum depression to know that I had all the classic symptoms, but I couldn't admit it to anyone. I hated spending time at home because of how inadequate I felt, and I avoided being there at all costs. I was confused and felt so alone because everyone expected me to succeed in my family just as I had in my career. My husband was the worst one of all. I could see his disappointment and unhappiness every time I looked at him, but I just didn't know how to fix it. Why did I have to be the one to care for the children anyway? He had more time than I did to do the laundry and cook the decent meal, but he never even thought to do so. As our kids grew older, I felt myself growing more and more distance from them. I had put an excessive amount of weight and no longer could even enjoy shopping with my friends. I retreated away from everything and everyone I knew. My work was the only thing that kept me going. I still had the respect of my colleagues and was on the fast track to success for my job. It took 7 years and 2 kids for me to realize that my marriage was a lost cause. I'd been miserable with him and was never any good at the marriage thing. I truly loved my children and wanted the best for them, and I knew that living in such an unhappy household was not the most ideal situation. Leaving him was not a spur of the moment decision. I thought about it many times over the past few years. For some reason, I'd always stuck around, just in case things would change for the better. We were mismatched from the very start, and no matter how long we stayed together, our lives would have always been miserable. So I took the kids and I left. In closing, I'm not a callous person. I do worry about my children. They're young still, excuse me, and I'm sure they'll bounce back. But I never really wanted them to be another statistic of children in a divorced family. I know they're going to miss their father, but I don't mind having joint custody. I know it would be better for them to be raised between him and his parents and me and my parents rather than between two of us constantly squabbling alone. It won't be too much of an adjustment for them since they have both grown up among their grandparents anyway. Could our marriage have been saved? Could things between us have been different? I don't have the answers to these questions, and I don't think either one of us had the time or the inclination to try to make it work. I feel disappointed that I wasn't successful at my marriage, but I think this was truly an unselfish decision for the sake of my children and for the sake of this happiness. I decided to leave him, and I am sure that one day my parents, kids, and friends are all bound to understand. And that is the end of her story, inshallah ta'ala. So with that, like always, I'll open up the floor and allow you guys to first comment, inshallah ta'ala, before we go into the analysis of the book and some things that I found myself that I would like to bring up, inshallah ta'ala. And if you can't unmute yourself, just raise your hands and I can unmute you, or again, you can use the chat. You can use the chat box. Okay, go ahead, Munira. Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you guys hear me?
Walaikum salam, yes.
So what I got from this is it sounds like she was raised with constant like appraisal for everything she did, and her life around being recognized for anything that she did. So when she went into this marriage, she constantly complained about not being um successful, or like when she's able to keep the kids clothed and keep them clean, that she wasn't being recognized for that, which is not like what you would expect as a parent. Like, no one should be thanking and praising you for every little thing you do for your kids. I also feel like it sounds like she developed like postpartum depression after that first child, and it wasn't addressed, and then soon the second child came in, which just exacerbated everything that was like already going on with her.
No, no, no. Yeah, I totally agree with you, subhanAllah. I think that, in marriage, oftentimes, we may look for that praise, inshallah ta'ala, and, for in some cases, it should be there. Alhamdulillah, every now and then to tell your spouse, mashallah, good job. Thank you for what you do with our children and the family and the likes, inshallah ta'ala. I guess it's a good sense of motivation, right? And to let them know that I see, right, the work that's being done. I appreciate the efforts that are being made, inshallah ta'ala. For it to have to be done all of the time, I think becomes problematic, inshallah ta'ala. It can be kind of like what you're talking about, Sister Monira, where maybe she was raised around being praised all of the time for everything that she did. And now because her husband wasn't praising her, and rather she complained that, he was kind of like minimalizing her pain and what she was going through in her body or whatever have you. And for our brothers, I think that's something that, we also have to take into consideration. For brothers, who haven't had kids yet, inshallah ta'ala, and couples that are newlyweds or couples to be, inshallah ta'ala, that when your spouse and you have a child, inshallah ta'ala, that it does take a toll on the body of the woman, inshallah ta'ala, in many different ways, right? She talked about her scars. She talked about the engorgement, right? Her breast being filled with milk and how that can be painful, and she had to release that, inshallah ta'ala. You talked about while she was pregnant, the gagging and the nausea and the vomiting and things of that nature, inshallah ta'ala. She talked about the excessive weight, which tends to happen after pregnancy as well. And I remember one of the scholars, he says that, as men, we have to remember that this is the sacrifice that our women, our wives, inshallah ta'ala, are making, right, to bring life into this world, right, to give us children, inshallah ta'ala, that they're going to sacrifice their bodies, right, and they're not going to, many of them are not going to go back to be looking the same way they did prior to marriage, right? She may not go back to being, thin or in shape. Allah knows best. Sometimes some bounce back easily and others don't. Alhamdulillah. But recognizing that as well with the scars, recognizing that all of that was done, inshallah ta'ala, so that your child can be born, inshallah ta'ala, and kind of looking at that with a sense of appreciation that you went through all of that, you put your body through that, inshallah ta'ala, so that we can have this child, right? So, from the man's perspective, they should be coming in ready for these things to happen, right? And ready and knowing that they're going to happen and take place, and that, you need to be sensitive to these things, inshallah ta'ala, and inshallah ta'ala figure out how you can aid your spouse later on down the road by recommending some creams for her to put on that may lessen the scarring, her not scratching at her belly, inshallah ta'ala, to lessen the scarring. The issue of, maybe, walking together every now and then to try to, changing your eating habits to try to, lose weight or whatever have you, right? But making it an affair that both of you do at home, inshallah ta'ala. So kind of just recognizing these things as a man, inshallah ta'ala. And then as a woman, right, and I'll get right to you, Brother Omar. As a woman, inshallah ta'ala, she talked about the issue, especially after the first child, that it was only maybe a few weeks of pregnancy and then she miscarried, that she was like, the husband, he didn't really show any care in the world. Kind of recognizing that men express pain and hurt and loss very different from women, inshallah ta'ala. It may not have been that he was just being callous. It just may be that that's the type of man he was, that he is not someone who is over emotional, right? He doesn't express his emotions openly like that. He doesn't wear his emotions on his shoulder. And, subhanAllah, I can understand that personally, right? I'm one of those people who, at the sign of death and loss and things of this nature, I don't wear my emotions on my shoulder. I tend to be the person who, seems to somewhat have it together, even though maybe I don't have it together, right? But I may not show my emotions or express my emotions or talk about my emotions, right? And that's maybe something I realized that could be a shortcoming within me, right? But some men or a lot of men are that way, inshallah ta'ala. And then some, mashallah, express the emotions and show their emotions, inshallah ta'ala. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're not there. I think the issue with what lacked here was communication. Maybe, sitting and talking with him, how do you feel? Did it bother you that we lost this baby? Did it not bother you that we lost this baby? And then kind of seeing where it went to from that point on. But then I think that she was so emotionally affected at that point that her only drive was, now I need to get pregnant, right? Even though they weren't probably ready for it, for as it seems from the story. They weren't financially ready in their marriage. They weren't ready as spouses to bring children into the world yet. But she thought, her being a failure, she needed to prove to herself that now she could have a baby, and not thinking about everything else, that perhaps maybe even this miscarriage, maybe it was just a rahmah from Allah, mercy from Allah, letting her know you weren't ready for this yet. And alhamdulillah, this is still comes with its rewards, inshallah ta'ala, the women who lose children. But kind of looking at it, from a different lens, inshallah ta'ala, sometimes. Brother Omar, go ahead. Hold on. Go ahead. Go ahead. You should be able to mic yourself now.
Mashallah, a lot of the things you just said were similar to what I was going to say. Um, I don't, Allah's mercy, mashallah, is and His wisdom oftentimes encompasses, always encompasses everything. So the things that, we may not be prepared for, Allah may protect us from that, um, in the long term. And, you know, part of having patience is knowing that, having certainty in that. I think that, and I don't want to speak too much on things that I don't know, but just in general, right? When we go on, when we take particular actions or move on with specific, commitments in life, right? We have expectations on what those things are or how they will happen, how they will turn out. And, no doubt we want to be able to plan and have an intention, the best intentions, right? But we have to try to be flexible, because when you're making a commitment, particularly in a marriage, you're not just entering in so that these things can complement your life. You're joining two lives together. So, you may want to be this hip couple. You may want to be like on the scene these days. We see, especially with the young couples, they want to be like the pop-in couple on Instagram, right? They do everything together. And if that's what your intention is to get married, and it doesn't turn out to be like that, immediately that's going to be, a shocking blow. And you want to be happy with your spouse, or you want to be able to share these moments with each other. Um, and inshallah, if the couple can be an inspiration for how to, be a proper Muslim couple, and do it with the correct amount of modesty, then, inshallah. But, you shouldn't, you shouldn't like take that as a morale hit. If it doesn't turn out to be that way, it should be some type of flexibility with like, okay, things didn't turn out the way I expected. Let me be able to pivot. Let me be able to pivot along with my couple, with my spouse, because I see my spouse is also handling things a different way than I am, and so, there needs to be that ability to be flexible, to be able to pivot, to be able to communicate, you know what I'm saying? And I think that makes all the difference, because you can see she had so many expectations, and every time something didn't go along her expectations, right, along with her intentions, as good as they might have been, it was a devastating blow for her morale, and it affected even her outlook on things in general. When in reality, it may not have been as serious as it was, Allah knows best. But that's kind of like what I was thinking about when I heard her, like, say certain things, etc.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair, Omar. MashaAllah, beautiful reflection. Barakallah feek. If anybody else, you can feel free to raise your hand. I have some stuff here in the chat. Um, Sister Saida said, this story sounds far too familiar. Most of my married friends went through similar and much worse scenarios. SubhanAllah. And may Allah help us. May Allah protect us from going through these types of things. And this is why, we've set these courses up, inshallah ta'ala, because we want people to have successful marriages, inshallah. We don't want people coming into Hollywood and Bollywood and thinking that, everything is going to just be peaches and creams all of the time, inshallah. But we want to, mashallah, deal with reality. You guys, Sister Side, I see you have your hand up. Bismillah. You can unmute yourself.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to, I feel like me as a single person, I know a lot of people who are like still kind of scared to even enter the married world today, including myself, because to be honest with you, most of my friends who are married with kids, like they're going through really crappy marriages. It's so bad where, and you have these little babies, toddlers involved, and then you have like the husband like choking my best friend, in front of the kids on the floor. Like you have cops coming all the time, but nothing ever happens. Literally, like the protection order of protection, restraining orders, but like nothing ever seems to be fixed. And then with a lot of these stories, because of culture, I believe they end up staying together, right? Or they think they can't do better. I have two other friends, similar stories. They just feel like, oh, who's gonna marry me now because I have a kid or I have two kids, or I don't want to walk around with a divorce tag, or it's my family's reputation. And it's just like, you just can't win. And I don't know, I feel like, we're not doing our part, or somewhere, something, it's just not right. It has to be the community at large too. And of course it comes from a cultural thing. Like, I know I come from like a base South Asian culture where, it looks bad if you're gonna, now not too many people care, but like, I feel like it's everything. But what do you suggest? What do you think could, I don't know, help to prevent this? Because I'm like hella scared for the next steps, and it's like, like they said, before marriage they had all these things in mind and they agreed on certain things. After marriage they're a complete different person, like with my friends too, who like forced my friend to work while she's pregnant 10 hours a day at the mall on her feet, and then he takes her entire income, gives her like $100 a month. Like you can't even buy diapers with that. Like it's horrible. So I just feel like, how do you fix this?
Subhanallah, there has to be a change in the trajectory, right, that we're taking, subhanallah. And this is the hope, right? This is the hope that, somewhat the upcoming generation, inshallah ta'ala, can be better than the last generation, right? Unfortunately, we're seeing where these errors and where these mistakes are within people who practice our faith, and then people who are from our same cultural background, that same cultural context. And somewhere down the road, we need to begin to break these stereotypes that exist and these very real scenarios that you're mentioning, the DV being one of them, domestic violence being one of them, right? That it's okay for you to put your hands on your wife. It's not okay to put your hands on your wife. Absolutely not whatsoever, subhanAllah. And I think that, this is where the community needs to stand behind our sisters, especially those sisters who have the courage to come out and say, listen, I'm going through domestic violence. My husband has put his hands on me. He has touched me, right? The community needs to stand behind these sisters. The imams need to stand behind them. We need to make sure that these types of things don't happen, right? Inshallah ta'ala. And if it means that we have to expose the scenario to the community, inshallah ta'ala, after, maybe giving the brother an opportunity, then so be it, inshallah ta'ala, right? So that, alhamdulillah, maybe he needs to be shamed, and maybe he needs to be taken away and put in prison for some time, right? Because these cases should all, ultimately be, handed over to the police and taken to the court system. And I know that the court system is very stringent here in America with these things, you know what I mean? But oftentimes, what happens with a lot of these domestic violence cases is that the women, like you said, they have some complex, right, about themselves, and then they figure, I'm not going to find anyone else, and then it gets to a point where they don't want to press charges, they don't want to go ahead and make the call, and then they end up staying in those very abusive relationships, and then sometimes those relationships unfortunately end up in death, right, because someone has gone too far, and then especially when you talk about choking your wife in front of the children, that's like absurd, crazy, not only are, mashallah, have you mentally and physically and emotionally affected your wife, your spouse, but you've done the same to your children. Your children are looking at you as, you're this madman who, are trying to kill their mother, in front of them, subhanAllah. So the trauma that you're placing upon the children is something that, I don't even want to think about. It makes me angry, subhanAllah. But I think that, this was the purpose for this course, right? This was the purpose for having these 3 courses anyway, right? This being the 3rd of them, that we begin to change that narrative. And when it comes to marriages and the whole issue of, you know, in the beginning they're one way and then when you get married they're another way, I think a lot of that has to do because the marriages just happen too fast. You know, we're people that we just get married too fast. You know, a month, 2 months later, we're married, inshallah ta'ala. And then next thing you know, really in that month, 2 months, you really didn't have the ability and the time to really find out, is this person the way they say they are, right? You haven't talked to them enough to see if they get angry, to see if they get upset, to see how jealous they are, to see, you know, how they're going to react in certain situations, inshallah ta'ala. And time is the thing that allows that to happen. This is why outside of the culture, you know, and outside of the religion, and not something that I say we should be doing, because we absolutely should be doing it, but we see that people date for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, until they feel comfortable that this is the person that I want to be with. I've seen, mashallah, some ins and outs about them, inshallah ta'ala, and it's not all facade, right? Inshallah. So, you know, I think taking time to do that, you know, doing marital courses, doing premarital courses, inshallah ta'ala, really having both parties engage in these types of things is important, inshallah ta'ala, for the growth of that marriage, and constantly us dialoguing about this and trying to figure out solutions and bring them forth. And you know, I wouldn't let the fear of these failed marriages be something that holds you back from getting married, but it should be something that makes you cautious and makes you, mashallah, aware, and allows you to, mashallah, when you are taking those steps to get married, that you, mashallah, are assuring that you're taking all of the proper steps, you're taking the time, inshallah ta'ala, to, mashallah, make sure that whatever you get involved in is going to be something that is going to be pleasurable and long lasting. And at the end of the day, in a lot of cases, there's only so much you can do, right? You're never going to be able to know every single thing, right? It's impossible. There's only so much you can do, and then there's some tawakkul, there's some trust and some reliance you have to place upon Allah, saying, Ya Allah, hopefully this is the right person for me, inshallah ta'ala. But you know, when you see those signs, don't neglect them, you know, address them right away, you know, don't let them build up, don't let them go on. Just like she says, you know, I wouldn't say anything. I would just keep it to myself. No, communicate, you know, find out what's happening, get help, right? She says, I was one, she mentions, I didn't like to ask for help. No, ask for help, right? Inshallah ta'ala, from your spouse, from family, inshallah ta'ala, or go out and get help from a therapist, inshallah ta'ala, if that's what's needed, especially with her having postpartum depression, which is serious. You know, so I think, you know, those are some of the things that would help us, inshallah ta'ala, to changing that narrative, inshallah ta'ala. And there are many successful marriages. Sometimes we have to kind of read on the successful side of marriage so that we can kind of, you know, steer ourselves back into that realm, inshallah ta'ala, and not just get caught up in the negativity, right? It's the same thing with like watching the news. You start watching the news and death and drugs and killing and murder and this, and then all of a sudden you just have a negative output on life. No, alhamdulillah, that's not everything about life. That's a portion of life, inshallah ta'ala, but there's another portion which, mashallah, can be very beautiful and magnificent, inshallah ta'ala, and we can kind of got to find that balance in between. Go ahead. I'm not sure iPhone has your phone hand raised. I'm not sure what your name is, so you can go ahead and the mic is yours.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, my beloved. I joined a little late, but just catch what was said in the last few minutes. And I have to agree with you when you talk about rushing into a marriage. You know, my wife and I, we've been together for 20 years. We've been married for 7 years. And, we took our time. We didn't rush into it. It's not something that you rush into. You know, you don't rush into something like this. This is something that's serious. This is something that you have to take in consideration. You know, you're going to be with this person, considering for the rest of your life. So you have to take in consideration that it takes time. You know, you have to get to know this person, his bad side, his good side, whether he's cheap, whether he's, he likes to spend, his habits, what kind of habits he has, before, and hers as well. Before you go into that, taking that step of marrying somebody, of, proposing to somebody, you first date that person, and then after that, her and I, we moved in together and we got to know each other even better. and throughout that, just knowing to get each other, getting to know each other better, you know, our good sides, our bad sides, our weaknesses, our strong sides. We finally decided after many, many years. I mean, she kind of like pulled my coat, up, marry me or what? So, we finally made that decision. We finally got married, and we've been married for 7 years. But like I said, we've been together for 20 years. And, and it takes work, it takes work, it's not easy, but at the end of the day, it's rewarding. It's a blessing, to find somebody that you can actually, share everything with, and, but yeah, you just cannot rush into something like this. It's not something that you rush into, you don't date a person and then a week later you're already proposing to that person, or that person is proposing to you and you're accepting that proposal. It doesn't work that way. You take your time, and inshallah, everything will work out for you. I mean, marriage is, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. And in the as far as being abused, a woman being abused, a man should never raise his hands at a woman. He should never do that. That's unacceptable. And once that happens, then you know what, it's time to hit the road. There's no reason for you to stay with that person, because what happens now is that it creates a cycle. If you have kids, it the kids see this and they grow up to learn the same thing. Well, mom, she got hit, and they think that it's okay, to do the same thing to their wives or to their girlfriends. So, the worst thing that you want to do is stay with somebody who's abusive, verbally, mentally, emotionally, whatever it is, just walk away, get that help. The help is there, and once you feel that, you're not good enough or whatever, no. You're more than good enough to find somebody that's going to treat you, like a queen. And that's what women should be treated as queens, and a man should never raise his hands at a woman. So, if you know of anyone who has ever experienced that, it's time to hit the road, because once they do that, once they raise their hands, once they call you outside of your name, they curse at you, whatever, they've lost total respect, and nobody deserves that. So, and marriages, yeah, it's a beautiful thing, Alhamdulillah, it's a beautiful thing. I love it.
Mashallah, mashallah. May Allah give you many, many more years together, inshallah ta'ala, until the day you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ameen. Sister Sumaya, she put up here, her purpose for having children was not correct. Yeah, we were discussing that. We believe that, her purpose was not correct. And then Sandra followed up by saying, I agree with Sumaya. She received what her intentions were. I think that they both failed to communicate and understand each other's love language. Absolutely. We see that, communication was one of the biggest failures in this marriage. They just maneuvered and with no communication whatsoever. And then, especially not knowing each other's love languages. Sister Saida, she said, you break your own heart with these unrealistic expectations. Yeah, definitely. Expectations have to be realistic, right? Especially in marriage as well. Even, and I wanted to mention that as well, that even in the beginning, right, it seems like prior to getting married, she kind of made it known, I don't want to cook, I don't want to clean, I don't want to be a housewife, right? She made that known, and unfortunately, it seems like the brother said, okay, I'll get in a hire maid, don't worry about it, I love you, you my baby, you my boo, and I got you, right? But then when they got married, it wasn't the case, right? SubhanAllah. And again, I think being very realistic with each other before getting married. Look, if the woman says that's not what I want to do, and that's what you as a man, have as an expectation, that your wife is going to cook for you, she's going to clean the house, and even though you may help or whatever have you and assist, I think that's an expectation that needs to be mentioned and verbalized. And whether she's accepting of that or not, then at that point you decide whether you move on and get married or not, inshallah ta'ala, right? Don't say, well, okay, we'll eat out every night, or I'll hire a maid. And the reality is that, financially, they weren't financially set for them to have a maid. That was clear, right? And he says the bills were piling up, she mentioned, right? And when he took over, she says, I was glad because the bills were piling up anyway, right? So, being real with those expectations. And at the end of the day as well, knowing that this is part of marriage, man, right? This is part of marriage. SubhanAllah, the whole issue, we talked about this in the last classes, the last courses, the whole issue of gender roles, right? The whole issue of the role of a man, the role of a woman, and how the society in today's day and time has changed those roles around. Where now the man plays the role of the woman. You stay home and you cook, right? And the woman, I'll go to work, right? You change the gender roles around completely, right? Subhanallah Rabbil Azim. And then this goes outside of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created in the nature of how things are to be, inshallah ta'ala. And then chaos comes about because of it, unfortunately, right? And again, that's not to say that the husband can't help out in the house. That's not what I'm saying, right? But naturally, this is what is expected, right? The woman is going to cook, she's going to clean, she's going to be the mother of the children, inshallah ta'ala. And then the husband is going to help. The husband is supposed to be the one who has qawwama. He is supposed to be the one who has financial responsibility over the house, inshallah ta'ala. But the Prophet ﷺ, he sold his own shoes, he cleaned his own clothes, you know what I mean? Sometimes he cooked his meal, you know what I mean? He helped around the house, inshallah ta'ala, right? As Aisha radiallahu anha told us about him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Did it mean that he did it all of the time? No, that didn't mean that either. It didn't mean that he did it in every household all of the time. It meant that he helped and assisted when he had the time, because we know that the Prophet was the busiest man on the earth, right? Subhanallah. But with all of that busyness, he still gave and partook in the household affairs, inshallah ta'ala. So I think having that conversation in the very beginning and being very clear of those expectations is important to the success of the marriage. And then not changing gender roles. Because if you begin to change the gender roles from the beginning, and right, this, you know, she mentioned, I was an independent woman and planned on staying that way, right? From the very beginning, I perceived her as like a very feminist type of woman, right? Subhanallah. And not saying that, you know, there's some good parts of feminism and then there's some bad parts of feminism, inshallah ta'ala, right? Because the whole issue of equality, men and women are not the same, inshallah ta'ala. You know, are they equal in front of Allah wa ta'ala? Yeah, but men have been placed as head of household over the women, inshallah ta'ala. But alhamdulillah, the rewards for good, they both get the same rewards. The rewards for bad, they both get the same sin, right? Inshallah ta'ala. So Allah, He treats us equal, inshallah ta'ala, in those terms. But Allah has told us that He's given man what He hasn't given woman, right? Man has strength that woman doesn't have, right? Sometimes man has some capabilities that he can't do that woman can't do, inshallah ta'ala. And the whole issue of, you know, there needs to be complete equality, it doesn't make sense, right? Because everything isn't that way, right? You know, inshallah ta'ala, we weren't created that way. Physically, we weren't created that way, inshallah ta'ala, for certain things, inshallah, right? Also, Sumaya said that it always sounds like she had felt like she needed approval. And Sister Monita was talking about this, right? That she kind of felt like she was praised and wanted approval all the time. And she says it can be an effect of how she was raised, not wanting to be looked at as a failure. At the end, she cared what her parents, friends, and children will understand why she did what she did. Seems that she cared very much about showing people who would see her, right? And then she says that she also seemed a bit arrogant, or as if she was better than those who were less educated and less financially well off. And she really wasn't that financially well off. When she was talking about getting pregnant, when she miscarried, she said these women who, then surely I must be able to do it as well, right? And again, I think it was just her kind of looking at her insecurities. I think a lot of that stemmed around her being insecure with where she was at that point, and how she was seen, right, and viewed, as you mentioned, Sister Sumaya. And at the end of the day, we really shouldn't be caring about what the other people think of us anyway, right? At the end of the day, it's about the household unit, the family, the spouses, inshallah, the husband, the wife, the children, and what we think is what matters in this realm, right? Under this house, under this roof. What others think about us, it doesn't matter. They don't live here. They don't share these responsibilities. They don't share in this struggle and in this sacrifice, so that they can take whatever they think and they can take it somewhere else, inshallah ta'ala. We couldn't care, right? Subhanallah. And this is a site that said the same red flags you ignore plus you give excuses for initially are the same reasons you end up leaving later. Absolutely. I agree, Sister Saida. You know, subhanallah. Sumaya, she mentions here, it seems that communication has been a major factor in most of these failed marriages. Correct. I think that working with a specialist in relationships is very important. Even when things are going well, many of us have our own challenges. Many people struggle with communication and other baggage that we bring into the marriage. Navigating through these challenges with a specialist could help us understand ourselves and our partner, as well as learn to communicate in a manner that will contribute to a successful marriage, inshallah. Inshallah. And alhamdulillah, great advice for those who need to, bring a therapist into the relationship, inshallah ta'ala, to, navigate through that marriage, inshallah ta'ala, and help them out in that marriage, inshallah ta'ala. Sister Saida, 50-50, 50%, 50-50 will never work out. Not everything is measurable. Some days it's 70-30, 40-60. basically, Sister Saida is saying there has to be a give and a take, right? And I agree totally. There has to be a give and a take, inshallah ta'ala. And again, just being very real with what's happening, inshallah ta'ala, in the home and what's going on in the home, inshallah ta'ala. And again, way too often, we, as we learned from the love languages, right? One of the things we learned from the love languages is that we always expect the other person to communicate the way we communicate. We always expect the other person to love the way we love. We always expect the other person to behave the way we behave, right? But as Dr. Chapman mentioned, that other person is not you, right? You're not marrying yourself. They're not a replica of who you are, inshallah ta'ala, right? So sometimes having to sit back and understand who they are, right? And how to communicate with them and what is going to touch them and what is their love language, inshallah ta'ala, and what is, inshallah, their likes and dislikes, inshallah ta'ala. It's important, right? Because things aren't always about you, right? And oftentimes in marriage, we always make the things about us, right? We want to be right. We never want to be wrong. Let's be real. We want to be right. We never want to be wrong, right? When the argument kicks off, I'm the correct one and you're the wrong one. And it's just that way, right? SubhanAllah. And we're not looking at things from the other lens. We're not putting on the other shoe, right? We're not taking our shoes on and putting their shoes on and walking in their shoes so that we can understand them. We don't take the time to sit there if there's communication, whether it be verbally, through text, through even however people communicate, inshallah ta'ala, in their marriages. We don't take the time to kind of maybe sometimes take that in and say, SubhanAllah, let me reflect and let me ponder on this. Could I have done things different to bring about a different outcome, right? Rather than saying, could you have done things different to bring about a different outcome? Way too often we're always pointing the finger at you, and we're never looking at me. But we see that one of the principles in Islam, hasibu anfusakum, right? This is the famous statement of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. Hold yourself accountable before you stand the day you stand before Allah, and you'll be held accountable, right? Again, hold yourself accountable. Look at yourself, sit down with yourself, talk to yourself, communicate with yourself. Say, could it be me, right? Because there's a huge possibility that it could be me. I could be the one who's falling short of the mark. I could be the one who's not communicating correctly. I could be the one who doesn't understand. I could be the one who is not loving. I could be the one, that is ... right? Rather than always thinking it's you, right? I've rarely heard in a relationship or sat down with a couple where the person says, Imam, I'm the problem. Rarely. It doesn't happen, right? It's always they're the problem, right? SubhanAllah. And that's not always the case, right? That would be unjust. Somewhere in that relationship, we're part of the problem as well, inshallah ta'ala, because we are not perfect specimens. We're not perfect human beings, inshallah ta'ala. We have lots of faults. And we bring those faults and those errors into the relationship, inshallah ta'ala. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on us and forgive us, inshallah ta'ala. Sister Sumayya, she says the first in-person marriage session with the therapist was excellent, mashallah. I highly recommend it. I think it was recorded. It is recorded, alhamdulillah, and I believe we did post it, inshallah ta'ala, on our YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. If not, it is definitely on our Facebook, but I will check if it went into our YouTube, inshallah ta'ala, as well. And they, mashallah, talk to us about many beneficial things as well. Really quick, one of the things here, in the beginning too, she says, I often heard people say that the first year of marriage was the hardest. Marriage remains to be challenging. The first year, the 5th year, the 7th year, 10th year, 20th year, there is no magic number, subhanallah rabbil azim, when marriage all of a sudden, mashallah, turns perfect. It's just like, Allah Akbar, mashallah, we made it over the hump. In that marriage seminar, subhanallah, strange enough, they called it the U-shape, right? The U-shape. And the most challenging period of the marriage in that U-shape was the 25-year mark. Subhanallah. It was the 25-year mark. And I told the sister, I was like, subhanallah, I'm at 25 years now, sister. So so you're telling me that now I'm hitting the most challenging part of my marriage. I'm getting to 25 years. I'm not 25 years yet. I have about a year left, inshallah ta'ala. And you're telling me that now, after 25 years, I'm going to hit the hardest point in my life, you know? SubhanAllah, you know, what do I have to look forward to, right? But SubhanAllah, this 25 years later, right? Because and then you start, they say at that 25-year point, for most people anyway, they start to become empty nesters, right? The children begin to leave the home, you know what I mean? And they start to now try to have to figure out what do they do without the kids, and you know what I mean, was their relationship only based on the kids? You know, do they still have the oomph and the spark and the fire? You know, so many things happen at that point. So, you know, I say all of that to say, you know, again, that is not just after the first year that, you know, you're going to go through some difficulty and some challenges. There are going to be challenges all the way through your marriage, inshallah ta'ala. It is just if you're willing to deal with those challenges and face them, right, inshallah ta'ala, and confront them, alhamdulillah, and be grown-ups and be adults, inshallah ta'ala, and find the best ways on how to solve them. And remember that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, inshallah ta'ala. I just want to see if the whole issue with competing with his mother was something else, that, you know, there should be no competition with his mother, right? Alhamdulillah, there's a love that he has for his mother that's special. You can never take that away. There's a love that he has for his wife that the mother can never take away either, inshallah ta'ala, right? There are two different types of loves, right? And they don't have to be equal, right? Because we don't love people equally. That's the other thing, right? Sometimes we think that love has to be equal. There's no such thing. This is why the Prophet ﷺ, he used to say, Ya Allah, don't hold me accountable, right, for that which I have no control over. Meaning my love, right? I don't have control over that. How I feel and how my emotions feel based on the interactions I have with that person, right? I may love this person more than that person, right? This is why when they asked him, Ya Rasulullah, who do you love the most? He said, Aisha, right? He says, and then who, right? He says, you know what I mean, her father, SubhanAllah, right? So SubhanAllah, to show that, you know, love has levels to it as well, inshallah ta'ala, and is not going to be the same. But alhamdulillah, you know, everybody has a special part of you, inshallah ta'ala, and you should never feel, especially when it comes to the mothers, you know, the spouse, the wife, and the mother-in-law, that there's some, you know, a battle there taking place for the heart and the love of that man, inshallah ta'ala. You know, there are two very different types of loves, inshallah ta'ala. The other thing too as well, that is very important, I believe, is that once you get married, I believe, and you can, inshallah ta'ala, you know, take it as you like. I believe don't have kids right away, right? You shouldn't have kids right away. Give yourselves time to get to know each other, inshallah ta'ala, a little bit more now, living in the home. When you go into having kids right away, inshallah ta'ala, and not preparing for it, right? Just like this couple, inshallah ta'ala, did, you know, you haven't weighed out all of the responsibilities, right? What are you going to do with the jobs if you both work? You know, what happens with the babysitter? Who's going to babysit? How much would we have to pay for the babysitter? Can we afford, you know what I mean, nursery? Can we do this? Can we do that? Can we afford for you to stay home? You know, the baby formula is expensive. Are you, if you can't, you know, inshallah ta'ala, if you can't breastfeed, you know, you have a lot of things to consider in this dynamic of bringing in a new human being into the earth, right? And into that home, inshallah ta'ala. It's not easy, right? Babies are not the latest tech. It's not the latest Apple phone. It's not the latest toy, inshallah ta'ala. They're human beings, inshallah ta'ala, that you need to take care of. You need to love. You need to, you know, you're going to sacrifice for, inshallah ta'ala, and that are going to be very difficult in bringing up sometimes, inshallah ta'ala. You know, kids are different. Some are easy, some are very difficult to raise, inshallah ta'ala. And all of that as well takes a toll on the relationship, right? And you need to know how to balance that as well within the relationship, because at times those children take a toll on the relationship, and sometimes you don't even know that, you know, your relationship is taking a beating because of your kids. You know, subhanAllah, again, where communication and things of that nature need to come in. But if you take your time, plan these things out, there shouldn't be no rush to have kids, inshallah ta'ala. You know, wait a year, inshallah ta'ala. Protect yourselves. You can practice coding to interrupt this, inshallah ta'ala. You can use condoms, all of these things. You can use the pill. You could, all of these things are permissible within the faith of Islam, inshallah ta'ala. That way, inshallah ta'ala, you're planning things out. And of course, qadar Allahu ma sha'a. If Allah decrees that you're going to have a baby and none of these things worked, and you tried not to, you tried your best to kind of prevent it, for some time until you guys kind of really get your feet wet, you're settled, inshallah ta'ala, because even like they mentioned, they were, they were engulfed in bills, subhanAllah, and then now they have babies, just much more bills and much more money that has to go out. They weren't ready, right? But if it happens, then qadarallahu ma sha'a. Allah doesn't place a burden upon a person that they can't handle, inshallah ta'ala. But take your time, right? Oftentimes I feel sometimes, and again, more so women than men, who have that, fantasy. Oh, I need a baby. I want a baby. Oh, look how cute they are, and all this and this and this and that, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, she got hit with postpartum depression. It wasn't what she thought. You know what I mean? She's looking at the baby like, oh my God. Subhanallah, right? Because again, babies aren't the latest tech. They aren't the latest toy, inshallah. They're human beings that also come with deficiencies and mashallah and beauty and all of these other things, inshallah ta'ala. I think we mentioned some of the other stuff that I had marked here. Brothers and sisters have brought it up. One last thing, inshallah ta'ala, that was mentioned was the whole issue that when she wanted her husband to stop working, right? So much, right? And she would get upset that the kids, they would come home and blah, blah, right? And run to him and stuff like that. And of course, it's because they haven't seen their father, right? SubhanAllah, because he was traveling for work. So, again, also not being as upset that maybe your child is giving more attention to the husband or the wife or whatever have you, what I mean? And you're like, well, what about me, right? SubhanAllah. Don't take it that way, inshallah ta'ala. Again, it doesn't mean the child doesn't love you, right? The child is expressing love in two very different ways, right? Inshallah ta'ala. It doesn't mean that he loves you more or loves her more, you know what I mean? That is something that the child can't even explain, right? And express, who they love more. They just love based on different things. Sometimes it's just one person gives them what they like, and subhanAllah, it's just really that they just want to be around that one spouse because mashallah they get everything that they like, right? SubhanAllah. And not so much, I love this parent more than the other, inshallah ta'ala. But she had him stop work, and then they needed the money, and then she went to work, right? And then she was like, well, he should take care of the kids. It didn't solve the problem. They still put themselves in the same predicament, right? Again, and then I think lack of planning, lack of communication, and Allah knows best. Here, Sumaya said, being married isn't easy. Both parties have to be dedicated to making it work and staying long term, getting help when necessary, and going their separate ways in peace and amicably if necessary. Yes, keep them in kindness or release them in kindness. No. And then Sister Monita, she put up again, she considered her baby ugly. Yes, subhanallah rabbil alim, because it resembled the grandfather. She said it resembled his father, right? Subhanallah, his grandfather. And again, you ask me, most babies come out ugly, right? They come out wrinkled and they come out with their head elongated, and it's not nothing really cute about it. Subhanallah, it's kind of alien figured. Mashallah, after a month, 2 months, 3 months, they go developing their characteristics and their traits, and they get their dimples in their cheeks, and they smile, and their head gets its form, inshallah, the wrinkles go away, right? And then mashallah, the beauty begins to come out in the children. But I don't think anyone, Allah knows best, they come out of the womb. And my mother tells me that she used to cry. She says when she had me, she said I was one of the most ugliest babies that she had ever seen. Right? But it's all good, alhamdulillah, right? Babies change, inshallah ta'ala. Alhamdulillah. And then she used work as an escape from the responsibility of motherhood, Sister Monita mentioned. And again, that's not going to help your children, right? Saying, well, I'm going to go to work just because I can't take it no more. That's it, I'm done. It doesn't help your children, inshallah ta'ala, and it definitely doesn't help the relationship, so Allah ta'ala knows best, alhamdulillah. Any other final comments before we close out today, inshallah ta'ala? Again, mashallah, jazakumullahu khairan for the great interaction today as well. Mashallah, tabarakallah. Also, because we're coming to the end of this class, 2 weeks, inshallah ta'ala, I'm willing to take some recommendations on what everyone would like to see next, inshallah ta'ala, or deal with next, inshallah ta'ala. And what may be everyone's interest. So again, feel free to email us, what you're interested in seeing as the next course. Happy Earth Reconnect at massnewyork.org, inshallah ta'ala, so that we can take that into consideration, inshallah ta'ala, and possibly see, how we should maneuver forward, inshallah ta'ala. We've, mashallah, done marriage for about 9 months now, right? That in itself should be a sign. We did marriage for 9 months. We've talked about marriage. 9 months, almost a year, right? To show how important these things really are, subhanAllah. Subhanallah. Okay, so we'll take that we'll take that into consideration, inshallah ta'ala. Yawm al-Qiyamah, inshallah ta'ala. Magic and that stuff, inshallah, definitely. I'll take that into consideration, mashallah. Jazakillah khair. Send the YouTube channel here. Give me 1 minute. Let's see if I can pull it up really quick. Should have it here. Accounts. Channels. I'm not going to be able to put it here, unfortunately. You know what? Hold on. I probably can't. Hold on. Let me do this real quick, inshallah ta'ala. And then, let me, because my computers, I'm not signed into that account. So it's going to be difficult for me to do it from there. Put it in here right now for you guys. So with that, inshallah ta'ala, our class would end, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us always successful in our marriages. Again, inshallah ta'ala, make us people who, mashallah, learn how to balance the difficulties within our marriage, and how to move forward, inshallah ta'ala, so that we find the good in each other, rather than the evil in each other, inshallah ta'ala. So here I've posted it. There it's posted, inshallah ta'ala. The Facebook page, inshallah ta'ala. The YouTube page. So the YouTube channel is there. All of the courses can be found on that YouTube channel. Everything that we've done so far. Some things still have to be uploaded. We still have to upload some of the last classes for this course, inshallah ta'ala, which we'll be working on this week. But the previous courses and everything else is there, inshallah ta'ala, as well. So again, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Jazakumullahu khairan wa barakallahu feekum, inshallah ta'ala. Alhamdulillah. Keep a balanced head, inshallah ta'ala, for those of you who are married. For those of you who are yet to be married, make dua. Don't let this stuff, again, scare you away from getting married. Take the steps, take the precautions, take the advice, inshallah ta'ala. Learn the lessons. And then just implement and apply all of that in the process of you getting married, inshallah ta'ala. And inshallah ta'ala, everything will be okay. But you don't want to stay away from marriage just because everybody else is having a negative, or some people are having a negative experience. It doesn't mean that you're going to have one. Just, mashallah, learn from their negative experiences and try not to make the same mistakes that they made. May Allah bless you all. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.